Hungry, tundra, leave me alone. These are some of the spontaneous utterances I've heard while I've been in body, speech, mind groups. In this video, I want to talk a little bit more about the structure of these groups, and particularly utterances, interjections, associations, attuned or misattuned expressions that people may have. And I'm going to also draw some parallels between this approach of body, speech, mind and some other Western traditions of both theory and processes and approaches. So likely there's many different types of body, speech, mind groups as there are body, speech, mind groups, right? We're always working within a context. We want to have our structure match the context and support the learning and the growth of the membership. Over the years, I've led them many different ways, given the setting, my supervisor. I think I've even led them differently as I've shifted and changed as a supervisor. I don't want to say I grew or developed because I don't know if I'm in any way better than I was before, but I work differently now. And I think at its heart, body, speech, mind isn't some kind of soteriological or theological view that we're reaching towards perfection. We're really just trying to work with what is. So it isn't a rigid system, right? We may be never able to fully manualize it, although it'd be fascinating to do research on it and having some of those findings about what works and doesn't work could give us some ideas about this. But we're trying to figure out who's in the group, what's the case on, how can we present it and work the dynamics of the group best. So often what I have found most interesting, sometimes distracting, but sometimes extremely insightful, beneficial, is when either the person presenting the case or someone in the group just blurts out something, right? They might be having a moment of stress distolerance and they're trying to regulate, but they might also be having a moment, a true aha moment, a moment of insight, of intuition. And this can often, as we explore what was shared earlier, kind of show something that we were missing in the whole, or maybe kind of show how a part it reflects the whole, or maybe makes the whole larger by adding a part. Sometimes people will add in various metaphors, and I think of body, speech, mind. I just think of this work as a creative endeavor, based on science and theory. As people add in these utterances, I see this as like, to use a metaphor, maybe adding more spices to a soup or adding more paint to a canvas or adding maybe more notes on a musical chord or maybe more flowers in a garden. They don't have to make sense. That's not the point, right? Later, we may see how they make sense. So I'll go over this in more detail, but generally I ask for very short associations or injections, just a few words. And I hope everyone can move along after such an interjection without searching for meaning or finding logic, much like the work of being a therapist. Being in body, speech, mind supervision really creates the necessity for dealing with ambiguity and complexity, not knowing, curiosity, regulation. So let me say a few things about the idea behind these utterances. And ideally, members learn themselves, know the context, maybe even know who's presenting, how distracting that would be, and kind of can over time sort through what might be an impulse or what might be a clever thing to say versus what might actually be illuminating as some kind of insight or intuition that is really needed in this case. So the idea behind this in Buddhism is a non-dualistic model, right? And it believes in the energetic contagion of mental experiences, right? Often this is called exchange, that we may feel very similarly to what our clients feel. Racker might say similarly that this is a concordant countertransference of some type. But I think it's important as we discuss the differences between Buddhist psychology and Western psychology, this basis of a non-dualistic framework. Of course, we're relatively able to understand that we are different people in the context, in the structure, and at the same time, we're all part of a whole. We're all water molecules in the river running downhill. I think also what's important to understand is that in Buddhism, consciousness isn't seen as solely in the brain and reductionistic as it's seen in Western science. I think given this perspective, these utterances, these associations can have great value, and maybe I'll highlight some of the ways that they might, similar ideas are presented in other traditions of psychotherapy. So in contemplative psychotherapy, there's an emphasis on this idea of resonance, that we're feeling similarly to the client, maybe even beyond words, physically similarly, energetically, when we feel sluggishly or sleepy. So in a very kind of concordant way. Now, of course, this idea of resonance is discussed quite a bit in the humanistic and existential traditions, and really a hope that we would feel some kind of resonance or kind of understand our blocks to the resonance. In other traditions, I think sharp and sharp, we're talking about couples, we're talking about how the therapist or even how partners can have similar mental vibrations, like they're both playing the same note. And this can be, in the object to object relations kind of tradition and other kind of psychodynamic traditions. Going in a whole different idea, Silberschatz years ago had this idea of responsiveness in psychotherapy, that we are attuned and that we're feeling what the client is feeling, and that we can, from that point of being in resonance, then our responsiveness is better. And older, but really truly fascinating research. I think I've covered in early videos a little bit about some qualitative methodologies that kind of embrace these ideas. So we may have a moment of insight that illuminates a part, or might be illuminating a whole. Something might click and someone's in the group's brain, either in the moment in the group, at later parts in the supervision group, or even outside the group. I always recommend that people live with the body, speech, mind in this kind of heuristic or hermeneutical or phenomenological way to see what might emerge if they spend a few minutes a day mulling over the body, speech, mind presentation. So I think it's less about these utterances' exact purity of a match, but really kind of opening the door for maybe more depth and maybe more coherence as we try to bring words or understanding to the case, working from our direct experience, not only logic and theory and research, but also being open to some new idea, some new association, because every client, every situation is unique. There's great wisdom to be learned and implemented from the huge canon of psychological literature. But it's also creative art, and we can open to the creativity in that, as opposed to maybe reducing one of our clients down to a diagnostic category, a specific case formulation, a specific population. So when we're talking about this kind of intuition or insight or aha moments, I think one of the best descriptions of this came from Francis Vaughan, who was a very significant transpersonal therapist. So instead of Vaughan made a really clear distinction between what might be impulsive and repetitive and what might be true kind of intuition. And that this skill is one we work at and refine. We deeply explore our own patterns, our own habitual thinking patterns, emotional waves that we go on. Oh, and then we're better able to discriminate between what is ours and what might be relevant to the case. In training this intuition, Vaughan puts a lot of emphasis on uh, our clinical experience and close supervision of our clinical experience and our training and also our life experience. So as many clinicians would emphasize that we are always a student, we are always discovering ourselves, we are always polishing the stone of us as a vehicle to help people change. It's a Zen saying, polishing the stones. And something that I see happen that comes out is often people will say some kind of metaphor about sitting in a dark room or this chili's too spicy or like a dog that lost their owner. Uh, and, this is very much in, the heuristic tradition of Rutgerian really put a lot of emphasis on finding the right kind of metaphors. And this also is in, existential humanistic, but really all traditions of psychotherapy, the power of metaphor. But I also want to balance that with what I thought was a wonderful book by Susan Sontag, The Illness as Metaphor, that often metaphors are just kind of cliches. They may be personal family cliches. They may be cliches of the culture of what we say when to escape a feeling or when we don't know what to say. It's a way of kind of reducing the complexity into a situation into a little clever, rote few words that really are as much more misattuning than attuning. But when people use metaphors, one of the ways I like to think about these is this a new creative metaphor or is this some kind of cliche, or even if it's not a cliche, is a kind of buying into one of the meta narratives of either the client or maybe a meta narrative of the clinician of how they see the change process working, maybe the embedding structure where we're looking for documenting behavioral change in every session, or might it be some kind of metaphor that's used in a subculture or culture. I remember in Susan Sontag's book, she talks about having cancer and all the cliches that people would give that felt very distancing and non-attuning of, oh, you do your best, you'll fight it and you'll get better. That really didn't capture the complexity of fear, the deep shift in her identity, the complexity, the confusion, the decision-making processes that she was facing at that time. So in thinking about these utterances, right, as we said, Buddhism is open to this idea of being non-dual, that there can be emotional, physical, cognitive, contagion process, exchange process going on, not only between therapist and client, but potentially all the time. So this is not dissimilar than, say, what we might find in the Western tradition, right? I think projective identification comes to mind, or what is the disowned part of the other person that we may be feeling or picking up on What is the shadow part that either the client or the therapist or even the system hasn't been able to metabolize? It's kind of kept a secret, remains invisible, right? What is kind of free floating out there? And maybe these utterances can help it bring it into awareness. Along similarly with this idea, we would have Racker's ideas of we might be playing concordant countertransference, feeling very similarly to the client, or potentially, as we're presenting in body, speech, mind, the person may be engaged in some kind of complementary countertransference, playing out a role in the psychic schemas of their client, or potentially even the members of the group or the group dynamic overall, maybe playing out some kind of enactment of the family dynamic of past treatment experiences. You can also find this in the ideas from, Eckstein and Wallerstein, particularly around supervision of what parallel process might be being played out in the group. This is also the idea of going back to phenomenology, this interaction first of Gendon in the existential tradition, that we're beyond our theories. First, we're having an interaction, maybe a direct experience. You can find these ideas of clients can provoke, or supervision groups could provoke, a sense of what Greenberg and EFT and lots of the process research called interpersonal evocative processes, of where we're joining in to some kind of process that may be outside of awareness. You see these in shared distortions of the therapeutic field, and Binswanger and Boss, and that folie à deux, as it used to be called in the DSM. That we're getting so resonant with the client or the situation or the culture that were just automatons within it. And building off of the ideas of Racker, you have the whole relational psychoanalytic or relational theory, that we're playing out these personal enactments, both with our clients, they're playing them out with us, and then in groups or in supervision, we're playing them out in our relationships. So what is the part? What is the schema? What is the roles we're inhabiting? Why are we inhabiting these roles, whether with our client or within the supervision idea? And building upon these ideas of relational enactment, as found in the diversity literature over and over, and a very big piece of my own writing and academic work is what might be the socio-cultural enactment. Kenneth Hardy has written a lot about this, was really a former founder in these ideas. So is this something that's happening between classes, races, gender, abilities, age groups, right? Are we getting caught up in not being fully present and aware, but getting swept away by the roles and the norms of behavior and the kind of meta narratives that we have seen throughout our life and our culture? Similar to this idea and a little more broad is isomorphism, that we're circles of behavior expand in their similarities between the therapeutic dyad and the client's potential relationship with others in their life, the systems in their life, that could be either, say, a too tolerant dynamic happening in the therapy or in the supervision, or maybe too punitive, that this is getting played across multiple levels. And I'm thinking of Barnard and Goodyear wrote a lot about this in terms of supervision. And if you see what I'm doing here, I'm drawing on often kind of the founding ideas and really wanting to give credit to people who made tremendous new contributions to the field. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of or the way I think about the structure, and people do all of these parts or some of these parts, depending on the setting, depending on the embedding situation where I've had to adapt body speech mind supervision when I was working in, say, criminal justice psychology or community mental health. At other times, I was encouraged to bring in all of it. Uh, I've been in certain settings kind of held to this is the model that we use, and other settings been able to kind of apply the model that I think might be most helpful. I'm thinking for newer clinicians, although really any clinician and students. So the interesting thing about body speech mind supervision is that there's multiple objects, parts, components to study, right? One is the client trying to touch the direct lived experience, the life world of the client. And usually in any of these stages that I'll explain, this is what we try to do first. But eventually we start talking about the experience, the direct experience of the therapist, or maybe even of the setting or the treatment team that's having with the client. And I found this to be a wonderful way of people understanding their bias or things in the shadow. So while we're going through body, speech, mind, and someone might ask a question like, oh, what about their family? And the therapist realizes they've never asked about this or never done a genogram. It may have not been appropriate, or for some reason, not considering this in their case conceptualization of the client, or they might ask about, say, some kind of demographic identity variable. And the person actually doesn't know this person's history with being the gender or the race or the class that they're from or currently living in. And this can open up the therapy and also open up our understanding of the client. When someone asks a question in body, speech, mind of the therapist, and the therapist doesn't have the answer to it, I think this is a great moment of illumination that everyone should celebrate. Karen Wigella, I think, gave one of the best kind of ideas about body, speech, mind supervision. It kind of shows us what we're missing, what we're not attuning to, what we're not catching in our phenomenological sphere or in our six senses in Buddhism. And then, if it seems appropriate, I like to bring in some kind of cultural or environmental factors that, what's the overarching model of the clinic that this person is working in. This could be also studied. So in terms of the structure, I think in any groups, we're talking about this comes from Sigismund's folks, like, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to help the client. And then that's the outcome. What's the process? Which would be, in this case, exploring the direct experience, using descriptive metaphors, using associations, and then what might be the structure for this. So I gave a brief structure I like starting initially with the client's lived experience in body, say, as an example, and then maybe do the therapist's experience of what their body is like when they work with the person. And then in these ideas of exchange or any of these Western ideas, what might be happening in the bodies of the people in the group? Is there some valuable piece of information that we can bring into this understanding of the client by bringing in our somatic awareness, which is so often minimized in traditional Western psychology? And then even when we bring this in, whether we're looking at Chinese medicine or looking at various somatic theories, that we can have a theory of what any body sensation may potentially mean. But in this initial stage of the body, speech, mind, we are apoke, we're non-judgmental, non-theorizing. We're just collecting the data. We're uh, feeling into what's being said. We're, to some degree, putting our cognitive abilities temporarily on hold. We're opening our hearts, and later we'll put on our thinking caps in some way. I think this is essential, this first stage of defining the norms of the group, right? Different people don't have people associate as much as I do. Uh, People focus it more on the client than the client and the therapist. So, uh, what can the members expect, right? This can increase safety, reduce anxiety. So, explaining the format, explaining the time constraints, uh, the boundaries of confidentiality, right? That what are the group norms? We share the talking time the other members of the group, or a way I've practiced and I've seen practices, whether leading a supervision group or other groups. I really want to collect all the information from all the other members. They are often way more insightful than I am, uh, but also they'll often say what I'm already thinking. And then, if need be, as the leader, uh, I will add something if I feel like it's additive or necessary or insightful, could be useful. So, usually, uh, before we begin the formal body, speech, mind part, we might have a moment of mindfulness. Sometimes people check in with themselves. What are they bringing in to this moment? What's their day like? What are they thinking about? What might be their emotional mood? What is their body sensations they're having in this moment? And potentially afterwards, maybe some moments of just kind of mindfulness, whether that's an object in the room, as you might see in many mindfulness therapies, of paying attention to an object and its weight and its smell and its color, or maybe just more open kind of shamatha meditation where we're just kind of focusing on the breath. And then, as part of the norms of the group, inviting members and encouraging members to come back to the present moment, to come back to mindfulness. It's so easy to hear a piece of information and create a very long story and a theory and intervention strategies. But can we remind ourselves to come back to what's being said, to what we're feeling in our bodies emotionally? Can we notice the passing thoughts and note them? I once had someone in the body, speech, mind group who wanted to take notes um, because they were scared they would forget and they didn't want to tax their working memory if they had an idea about, say, a repetition or a family dynamic or a family role or a relational role. And and I allowed them to do that. They said it helped them come back to present. Other people may have more rigid boundaries with that if the thought was really important enough, it may come back or someone may say it. Uh, and that was kind of allowing us to get away from the direct lived experience or the phenomenological descriptions. But it's a choice, I think, that members and leaders may have. So after this mindfulness and this check-in, generally we welcome the client with respect. We're learning about their story confidentially, and holding it in confidence. We're learning about their successes, their challenges, their struggles, their pain. And often we may bow someone in after after the moments of mindfulness and before the presentations. I've said a lot about kind of the body, speech, mind work in this, and some of my general ideas is first client, then therapist, then maybe embedding organization or environmental or contextual elements, but also welcoming in utterances that feel like intuition that may be said during the part where we're learning about a client, but may kind of relate to potentially the therapist or the system or the treatment center. Being a good body, speech, mind member, I think is, living with curiosity, opening to what people are saying, allowing yourself to be moved by it, and expanding one's awareness over time of various factors that may play into psychotherapy or how one understands the world. I often encourage students to maybe these days you can listen to a video about phenomenological interview strategies and also many of the Buddhist teachings and trainings, from Renzi Zen to Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism may ask questions or have specific meditations that are kind of very expansive, looking at a multitude of factors that may be influencing the current karmic manifestation of what's going on with the client. So after we finish these, I like to have a time where before applying theories or before applying treatment intervention suggestions, kind of an open space as we might have in a lot of these qualitative research methods. What stood out? What seemed meaningful? What connection may have been made outside of any previous theory? What are people feeling? What metaphors? Is there a body movement? I've had people sing or draw a picture on the blackboard and, making sure it's any of these things ideally aren't performative of the member who's sharing, but somehow is related to the case. So in this way, I feel like we're doing, we're really touching into the client and we're doing kind of each client is its own qualitative study, its own idiographic experience before we start applying reductionistic principles and ideas. Although we may come up with new reductionistic ideas and they're interesting to consider. So I think after this kind of generative process, we might put on our thinking caps a little more. Maybe they go in a little bit in the generative process or the creative process. And everyone in the group is generally has some training in various personality theories, developmental approaches to psychotherapy. And I invite people to share these, how they might see and understand the case. So this can be helpful in multiple ways, I think. One is it may provide a really good structure that we can hold on to tentatively that could direct how we work with this client moving forward. I think it also highlights the people in the group's kind of biases, rigidity about their specific thought process. So people might see something the client does as acting from an aggressive or relational drive, or it may fit in with some Jungian archetype in drama, or it may be some kind of coping mechanism or cognitive distortion. And I welcome these in because in addition to maybe being helpful to the case, we have some time here to examine in the group of whether this seems to fit or not fit. And people can the members group can kind of begin to more critically examine or even see the biases in the kind of research and theory that they're holding on to most tightly. I also like this in terms of working with newer clinicians or really any clinicians or students, that it's expanding their palette of their lenses for understanding others and understanding cases. It's building their vocabulary so they can talk with people from many different kind of theoretical lenses, and even clients or clients' families may hold on to their lenses that it's good for us to be able to translate and talk with other clinicians, other people on the treatment team, the client's family, significant stakeholders in the case. The idea here isn't that we choose the right one that someone brings forth, but maybe one of these has some useful information and a useful perspective. So after we finish this, I'm thinking about where do we go from here? How do we move forward? Is there some kind of change in the way we were understanding the client? Do we need to adjust the case conceptualization? Do we need to kind of adjust the treatment plan? Say, for instance, should we kind of potentially encourage a client to socialize more or give them more permission to distract themselves? Right? Might there be a use for bringing in some CBT or DBT skills to help them with regulation or interpersonal communication? So we can bring these forth and quickly think about how we would do this. Why is this coming to mind? What may be the potential outcomes? And then I think that there's a sense of contemplative psychotherapy in Buddhism that I think has resonance going back to the very earliest psychology in the United States of William James and pragmatism. And you can see this in many other schools of thought. Jaime Spotnitz, one of the founders of modern analysis, would often say that his treatment was whatever would work. And then in Nancy McWilliams, who's a wonderful communicator of a variety of lenses, really highlights this idea of what might be possible in the treatment, what can change, what we may not be able to change. Right? In Buddhist thought, we may not be able to change this dukkha, this existential angst, this suffering, the unpredictability of the world, the impermanence of things. But we could potentially help them relate to this in a different way, right? Or potentially a cousin might be existential psychology, and they might be able, the client or the therapist, wrestle with the existential givens in a different kind of manner to kind of reduce suffering and to live more fully and move towards the good life, to drop these existential phrases. We might just give suggestions for one or two things, or there may be no changes of treatment plan or case conceptualization, and that we just pause here, right? And then we just live with it. The person who presented lives with it, and also the members of the group live with it. And this is a choice that we can stop at any point and have people kind of live with what was presented up to this point and let it germinate, take a break, come back, look at it through different lenses, go hiking in nature. And if a thought about the case comes up and it's an aha moment, somehow note that. And then I think I like to, after a body, speech, mind presentation, have the person who presented and the whole group kind of check in. What came up? What feelings did people have? What did they notice about their behavior afterwards? Did they have some kind of cognitive understanding they'd like to share in some way? Even though they're we've already done the formal presentation. It's living, it's dynamic. In that next session, I think it's important to check in with everyone about their experience of this. And then nothing's ever dropped, right? Or at least until this supervision group ends, that at any time we can return back to any body, speech, mind presentation and say what has come up with us around this body, speech, mind presentation. Sometimes as you do a variety or many of these body, speech, mind presentations, you might see some similarities in the patterns that may be happening between clients that may fit some theory or maybe a generative new theory that we could consider. We also may see some patterns in how this presenter, body, speech, mind, is presenting, what's included, what's not included, and there may be some kind of awareness building that can come up. And also within the group can get into norms if they do it in this way. And is there a way that we can return when we're noticing these patterns and not other patterns to wonder, what's the shadow of this group? What are we missing? What are we avoiding? Why are we avoiding it? So I think in close, this is a living, dynamic process, although there is structure and some elements that we can put into categories and elements that can be reductionistic, thinking in terms of medication, right? We're medication and clients on it. We're doing these with the prescriber in the group. It's also leans more towards expansiveness, direct experience, the life world of the client, maybe the life world even of the clinician and their role as clinician, and potentially beyond that, if it feels appropriate and safe in the group to do that, right? There's a old joke, and I'm someone who does both. I do mainly group therapy groups and supervision or consultation groups. And my consultation groups, people are scared to death to talk about their clinical work. It's the most vulnerable thing that they feel like they could ever do. So they want to talk about their lives. And then in, say, process groups where therapists are working towards development, recognizing their patterns, getting feedback on their communication, how they impact others, they may not want to talk about their lives and their reactions to one another, but maybe run to a case. Maybe there's some counterdependency always alive in group, regardless of what the task can be. So I realize I dropped a lot of ideas. Some of these ideas you may be familiar with. You might want to do a little research on some of the ideas I put forth or not. And just doing this practice, I have found to be tremendously useful, beneficial to how we proceed with clients, beneficial towards how treatment agencies or clinics can maybe make some adjustments to better serve their clients, can be really, really helpful for clinicians and noticing what they pay attention to and what they do not pay attention to. Also helping clinicians kind of uncover potential biases or points of anxiety that they may have. And I think it brings everyone in this group some development in empathy, maybe even attunement, compassion, critical thinking skills, creativity. And it's a practice. It's not something that we ever master, and it's living and it's impermanent and it's changing and it's contextual to the client and the members of the group, and even to the person leading the group of what they feel would be most helpful to the members of the group. And of course, this is always a collaborative process of how can all of us get together and work in a way that could be helpful and not destructive. Along those lines, since this is a group supervision where you are paying attention to any destructive elements that can happen in groups of groupthink or scapegoating. So a lot for you to mull over. Obviously, I think my passion for this approach to supervision has become clear, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.